In the grand kingdom of Athermore, where every royal gesture is choreographed and every smile is practiced, two young princes were about to turn the most important parade of the year into an unforgettable spectacle. What started as a perfectly planned ceremonial procession would become the day that reminded an entire nation why sometimes the most genuine moments happen when nobody's following the script. The cameras were rolling, the crowds were cheering, and the royal family was supposed to wave with dignified grace. But when 7-year-old Prince Oliver decided that proper protocol was far less interesting than making his older brother Prince Alexander laugh, the entire kingdom was about to witness something extraordinary. The moment when being real became more powerful than being perfect. The morning sun cast long golden shadows across the cobblestones of Athermore's Grand Avenue, as thousands of citizens gathered along the parade route. Vendors sold miniature flags and royal memorabilia, while children perched on their fathers' shoulders, craning their necks for the first glimpse of the royal procession. This was the annual Victory Day parade, commemorating the kingdom's greatest triumph, and for the first time in 5 years, the young princes would participate in the main ceremony. Inside the royal palace, chaos reigned, despite the morning's importance. Prince Alexander, 11 years old and acutely aware of his future responsibilities, stood perfectly still as his valet adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the 3rd time. The navy blue jacket with its intricate gold braiding felt heavier than usual, and the weight of expectation pressed down on his young shoulders even more than the formal attire. "Remember, Your Highness," his etiquette instructor, Lady Margaret Whitfield, reminded him for what felt like the 100th time, "maintain eye contact with the crowd, wave slowly and deliberately, and keep your posture straight. The entire kingdom will be watching, and this parade will be broadcast to neighboring nations as well." Alexander nodded solemnly, practicing his wave in the mirror. He had been preparing for this moment for months, studying footage of previous parades, memorizing the route, and rehearsing his role until every gesture felt mechanical. As the future king, he understood that even at 11 he represented something larger than himself. Meanwhile, in the adjoining chamber, 7-year-old Prince Oliver was having his own preparations, though they were proceeding considerably less smoothly. His identical ceremonial uniform seemed to have a mind of its own, with the cape constantly twisting around his legs, and the ceremonial sword, thankfully a replica, clattering against everything he passed. Oliver had inherited his father's restless energy and his mother's mischievous spirit, a combination that made sitting still for royal protocol lessons nearly impossible. "Oliver, please stand still," pleaded his governess, Miss Sarah Chen, as she attempted to fasten his cape properly. "This is a very important day, and people from all over the kingdom have come to see you and your brother." "But why do we have to wear these funny clothes?" Oliver asked, spinning around so his cape billowed dramatically. "And why can't I bring my toy dragon? Prince Fierce-a-Lot would love to see the parade." Miss Chen smiled despite her exasperation. Oliver's enthusiasm was infectious, even when it complicated formal occasions. "Because today you're representing the royal family, and sometimes being a prince means wearing special clothes and following special rules." "That sounds boring," Oliver announced, though not unkindly. He was simply stating what seemed to him an obvious fact. In the palace's main hall, King Edmund and Queen Isabella conducted their final briefing with the Royal Protocol Office. Every detail had been planned with military precision. The timing of their departure, the speed of the horse-drawn carriages, the specific points where they would acknowledge the crowd, and the moment when they would reach the royal viewing platform for the ceremony's climax. "The weather forecast is perfect, Your Majesties," reported the Chief of Protocol, Sir James Pemberton, consulting his detailed charts. "The crowds are gathering as expected, security is in position, and all the ceremonial units are ready. The princes have been briefed on their roles, though I must mention that Prince Oliver seemed rather energetic during rehearsals." Queen Isabella exchanged a knowing glance with her husband. Oliver's energy was both his greatest charm and his biggest challenge during formal events. "He'll be fine," she assured Sir James, though privately she wondered what surprises her younger son might have in store. The royal family gathered in the palace courtyard where their magnificent carriages waited. The lead carriage, adorned with the royal coat of arms and pulled by 4 pristine white horses, would carry the king and queen. The second carriage, slightly smaller but equally elegant, was designated for the princes. Both vehicles gleamed in the morning sunlight, their brass fittings polished to perfection, and their leather seats prepared with ceremonial cushions. Alexander approached his carriage with measured steps, his mind running through the checklist of behaviors he had memorized. Wave height, smile duration, posture maintenance, everything had been practiced until it became second nature. He had even rehearsed conversations he might have with Oliver during the ride to keep his brother focused and well-behaved. Oliver, however, was captivated by entirely different aspects of the morning's preparations. He marveled at the horses' braided manes, attempted to peek under the carriage to see how the wheels worked, and pestered the coachman with questions about how they controlled such large animals. His curiosity was boundless, and his governess found herself gently redirecting his attention every few moments. "Remember, boys," Queen Isabella said as she kissed each of her sons goodbye. "This parade is about showing our gratitude to the kingdom and celebrating our shared history. The people want to see that their future leaders care about them and understand the importance of this day." "I understand, Mother," Alexander replied seriously, straightening his shoulders even further. "I'll wave really big so everyone can see me," Oliver declared, demonstrating an enthusiastic wave that nearly knocked over a nearby ceremonial standard. King Edmund placed a hand on each boy's shoulder. "Just be yourselves," he said, though he directed this advice primarily toward Alexander, who had been so focused on perfection that he seemed to have forgotten how to be a child. "The people love you because of who you are, not because of how perfectly you can follow protocol." As the carriages rolled through the palace gates and onto the Grand Avenue, the crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Cheers erupted from thousands of throats, flags waved frantically, and the very air seemed to vibrate with excitement. Alexander had experienced royal attention before, but never at this scale. He waved methodically, his smile genuine but controlled, acknowledging different sections of the crowd with the precision he had practiced. Oliver's reaction was entirely different. His eyes widened with wonder at the sea of faces, the colorful banners, and the sheer energy of the celebration. He waved enthusiastically, pointed at interesting costumes in the crowd, and seemed to treat the entire experience as a magnificent adventure rather than a solemn duty. "Look, Alexander," he exclaimed, tugging on his brother's sleeve. "That lady has a hat shaped like our castle, and those children are wearing crowns just like ours." Alexander smiled despite himself. His brother's excitement was contagious, and for a moment, he forgot about maintaining perfect posture. "They're celebrating with us," he explained, genuinely pleased by Oliver's observation. "They're showing that they're part of our kingdom, too." The parade progressed through the city's historic district, past ancient buildings that had witnessed centuries of royal processions. Street musicians played traditional melodies, adding their own soundtrack to the celebration, while local artisan guilds displayed their finest work from decorated balconies. The entire city had transformed itself into a living tribute to their shared heritage. As they approached the first major intersection where the largest crowds had gathered, Alexander noticed something that made him slightly nervous. A group of international dignitaries occupied a specially constructed viewing platform, their formal attire and serious expressions indicating that this was indeed the kind of moment that would be scrutinized and remembered. Cameras from multiple news organizations tracked their carriage's progress, and he could see photographers adjusting their equipment for the perfect shot. Oliver, oblivious to the diplomatic implications of the moment, was enchanted by a group of children who had climbed onto a fountain's edge to get a better view. They were waving handmade signs and shouting greetings in voices that carried over the general din of the celebration. Without considering protocol, Oliver stood up in the carriage and waved back with both hands, his cape streaming behind him in the breeze. "Oliver, please sit down," Alexander whispered urgently, acutely aware that their every movement was being photographed and analyzed. "Remember what Lady Margaret said about maintaining dignified composure?" But Oliver was too delighted by the children's enthusiasm to worry about composure. He had spotted a little girl, probably about 5 years old, who was holding a drawing of what appeared to be the royal family. Her artwork was endearingly imprecise. The figures looked more like colorful stick people than actual royalty, but her pride in her creation was obvious. "She drew us!" Oliver announced, pointing toward the girl with such excitement that he nearly toppled over the carriage's side. "Look, Alexander, she made a picture of our family." Alexander looked where his brother was pointing and felt his careful composure waver. The little girl's face was radiant with joy as she held up her drawing, and her parents were beaming with pride at their daughter's moment of recognition by actual royalty. It was exactly the kind of genuine, heartwarming interaction that made royal service meaningful. Yet Alexander found himself frozen between his training and his natural impulse to respond warmly. The carriage continued its stately progress, but Oliver kept looking back at the little artist until she disappeared from view. "Why didn't we stop to see her picture better?" he asked his brother. "I wanted to tell her that she's a really good artist." "Because we have to follow the schedule," Alexander replied automatically, though he was beginning to question whether following the schedule was always the most important thing. "The whole parade is planned out, and if we stop in one place, we might disappoint people in other places." Oliver considered this explanation seriously, his brow furrowed in concentration. But what if stopping to look at her picture would make her happy? Isn't making people happy part of being a prince? The question caught Alexander off guard. In all his preparation for royal duties, he had focused on proper behavior, historical significance, and diplomatic protocol. But Oliver's simple question highlighted something that had gotten lost in all the formal training: the human connection that was supposed to be at the heart of royal service. As their carriage rounded the next corner, the crowd grew even larger and more boisterous. A marching band from the Royal Military Academy was playing ceremonial music, their crisp uniforms and synchronized steps adding grandeur to the procession. Behind them, various civilian groups had organized their own tributes. Children's choirs, dance troupes, and community organizations all participating in the celebration. Alexander waved steadily, his smile becoming more natural as he began to focus on individual faces in the crowd rather than the overwhelming mass of people. He noticed an elderly veteran wearing his medals proudly, a group of teenagers cheering enthusiastically from a balcony, and families who had clearly prepared for this day with special outfits and homemade decorations. Oliver, meanwhile, had discovered that different types of waves produced different reactions from the crowd. A slow, dignified wave received polite applause, but an enthusiastic, double-handed wave generated cheers and laughter. He began experimenting with various gestures, delighted by the crowd's responses, and completely unaware that his improvised interaction style was exactly what the formal protocol training had been designed to prevent.
"Oliver," Alexander said quietly, "remember that we're supposed to wave in a specific way."
"Lady Margaret showed us the proper technique, but the people like it when I wave like this," Oliver replied, demonstrating another enthusiastic gesture that made a nearby group of children dissolve into giggles. "Look how happy they look! Isn't that good?" Alexander had to admit that his brother was right. The crowd's response to Oliver's natural enthusiasm was genuine and joyful in a way that seemed more meaningful than polite applause for correct protocol. Yet he still felt the weight of expectation, the knowledge that their behavior was being evaluated and would be discussed in news reports and diplomatic briefings. As they approached the halfway point of the parade route, where the crowds were densest and the ceremonial importance was greatest, Alexander steeled himself for the most challenging part of the morning. This was where the international media had positioned their primary cameras, where the most distinguished guests were seated, and where every gesture would carry the most significance. The moment that would change everything was still ahead of them, waiting around the next corner where a simple case of mistaken identity would transform a carefully orchestrated royal parade into something far more genuine and memorable. The moment everything changed began with what appeared to be a simple misunderstanding. As the royal carriage approached Cathedral Square, the parade's most significant stop, a small commotion erupted in the crowd near the ancient fountain. A woman was calling out frantically, her voice carrying above the general celebration noise, though her words were initially unclear due to the distance and surrounding din. Alexander immediately tensed, his training kicking in as he scanned for potential security concerns. Royal protection officers were already moving subtly through the crowd, their practiced eyes assessing the situation. However, as the carriage drew closer, the source of the commotion became clear and surprisingly innocent. A little boy, perhaps 4 years old, had somehow become separated from his family in the excitement of the parade. He stood near the fountain's edge, tears streaming down his face as he called for his mother, his small voice nearly lost among thousands of celebrating people. The woman calling out was clearly his mother, fighting through the packed crowd to reach her frightened child. Oliver spotted the crying boy immediately, his natural empathy overriding any consideration of protocol or proper procedure. "Alexander, look," he said urgently, tugging on his brother's arm. "That little boy is scared and lost. His mama can't get to him because there are too many people." Alexander saw the situation too, and his heart went out to the frightened child. However, he also understood the complexity of their position. The parade was on a strict schedule, security protocols were in place, and any deviation from the planned route required clearance from multiple authorities. Their carriage was expected to proceed directly to the ceremonial platform where distinguished guests and international dignitaries were waiting. "I wish we could help," Alexander said genuinely, "but we can't stop the parade." "I'm sure the security officers will help him find his mother." But Oliver was already formulating his own solution. As their carriage passed closest to the fountain, he suddenly stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and shouted at the top of his young voice, "Don't worry, your mama is right over there." He pointed dramatically toward where the woman was struggling through the crowd, his small but clear voice somehow cutting through the general noise. The effect was immediate and remarkable. The little boy stopped crying and looked in the direction Oliver was pointing. The crowd, realizing what was happening, began to part voluntarily to create a path for the mother. People started passing along the message, creating a human chain of communication that guided the woman toward her son. "Look!" Oliver exclaimed triumphantly to his brother. "It worked. She's almost there." Alexander watched in amazement as the crowd transformed from a chaotic mass into a community working together to reunite a family. People were lifting the little boy up so he could see his mother approaching, calling out directions, and gently moving aside to clear the way. The spontaneous cooperation was beautiful and moving, sparked by his brother's simple act of compassion. As the mother finally reached her son and scooped him into a relieved embrace, Oliver stood up again in the carriage, applauded enthusiastically, and shouted, "Hooray! She found him!" His celebration was so genuine and infectious that the entire crowd around the fountain began applauding as well, turning a moment of distress into a shared triumph. The international dignitaries on the nearby viewing platform were witnessing something unprecedented. Instead of the formal, controlled royal appearance they had expected, they were seeing a young prince who cared more about helping a frightened child than maintaining ceremonial protocol. The cameras that had been positioned to capture stately royal waves were instead recording a moment of spontaneous humanity. Alexander found himself at a crossroads that would define not just this day, but his understanding of what royal service truly meant. Every instinct trained into him over months of preparation told him to encourage Oliver to sit down, to restore proper decorum, and to continue the parade according to plan. Yet watching the joy on his brother's face, and the crowd's positive response to genuine compassion, he began to question whether perfect protocol was really the highest goal. "Oliver, that was wonderful," Alexander said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. "You helped that family when they needed it most." Oliver beamed at his brother's approval, but his attention was already captured by something else entirely. A group of children at a nearby street corner had organized their own parade in miniature, complete with makeshift costumes and cardboard crowns. They were marching in a small circle, imitating the royal procession with earnest concentration and impressive creativity. "Alexander, look at those kids," Oliver exclaimed, pointing toward the amateur parade. "They're pretending to be us. They made their own crowns and everything." The sight was indeed charming. About 8 children of various ages had clearly spent considerable time preparing their tribute. Their costumes ranged from elaborate. One boy wore what appeared to be a modified bathrobe decorated with aluminum foil stars, to simple. A girl had fashioned a crown from construction paper and glitter. But their enthusiasm was uniformly infectious. Without any hesitation, Oliver stood up in the carriage again and began waving specifically to the children's parade. But his wave wasn't the dignified gesture he had been taught. Instead, he created an exaggerated theatrical wave that perfectly matched the spirit of their playful tribute. The children's reaction was explosive. They began jumping up and down, waving back with wild enthusiasm, and calling out greetings that were probably unintelligible, but definitely heartfelt. One particularly bold little girl broke from their parade formation and executed elaborate curtsy that nearly toppled her over, but demonstrated perfect dedication to her role. "They're so funny!" Oliver laughed, genuinely delighted by their antics. "Look at that girl's curtsy. She's better at it than I am." Alexander watched the exchange and felt something shift inside him. These children weren't interested in perfect protocol or diplomatic impressions. They were celebrating with pure joy, creating their own magic, and Oliver's natural response to their enthusiasm was creating a connection that felt more meaningful than any formal wave could achieve. Then something unexpected happened. One of the children in the amateur parade, a boy who couldn't have been older than 6, suddenly broke away from his group and ran directly toward the royal carriage. Security officers immediately began moving to intercept him, but his intention quickly became clear. He wasn't approaching threateningly or seeking to cause disruption. He simply wanted to give something to the princes. "Wait!" Oliver called out, somehow sensing that this wasn't a security threat. "He has something for us." The little boy reached the carriage's side and held up a small object, a paper crown he had clearly made himself, decorated with drawings of what appeared to be dragons and castles. His face was shining with the pure excitement of a child meeting his heroes, and his gesture was so innocent and generous that even the security officers paused. "I made this for Prince Oliver," the boy announced proudly, his voice carrying clearly in the moment of unexpected quiet that had fallen over this section of the crowd. "'Cause I heard he likes dragons, and I drew Prince Fierce-a-Lot on it." Oliver's reaction was immediate and completely unguarded. His face lit up with astonishment and delight. This stranger had somehow known about his beloved toy dragon and had incorporated that knowledge into a handmade gift. Without considering protocol, security concerns, or diplomatic implications, Oliver leaned down from the carriage and accepted the paper crown with the same reverence he might have shown a piece of royal regalia. "This is the most beautiful crown I've ever seen," Oliver declared, examining the crayon drawings with genuine appreciation. "You drew Prince Fierce-a-Lot perfectly. How did you know he was my favorite?" "My sister told me," the boy replied proudly. "She goes to school with someone whose cousin works at the palace, and they said you always carry a toy dragon." The crowd around them was watching this exchange with fascination, and Alexander realized that something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't a planned ceremonial moment or a carefully orchestrated photo opportunity. This was a real connection between his brother and a citizen of their kingdom, the kind of authentic interaction that royal service was supposed to foster. But then Oliver did something that no amount of protocol training could have prepared anyone for. He carefully removed his own ceremonial crown, the actual royal crown he was supposed to wear throughout the parade, and placed the handmade paper crown on his head instead. "There!" Oliver announced happily. "Now I'm wearing a crown made by a real artist." The effect of this gesture rippled through the crowd like electricity. People began cheering not with the polite enthusiasm appropriate for royal protocol, but with the genuine joy reserved for moments of pure, unexpected magic. Children were laughing, adults were applauding, and even some of the international dignitaries were smiling despite themselves. Alexander felt his carefully maintained composure completely dissolve. His brother had just committed what was probably the greatest breach of royal protocol in the kingdom's recent history, and yet somehow it was the most perfectly appropriate thing that could have happened. The sight of Oliver wearing a handmade paper crown decorated with crayon dragons, his face glowing with happiness and gratitude, was more royal in its genuine humanity than any amount of formal ceremony could achieve. "Oliver," Alexander said softly, that was perfect." Oliver grinned at his brother, adjusting his paper crown so it sat more securely on his head. "It feels more comfortable than the real one," he confided. "And it has Prince Fierce-a-Lot on it, so it's extra special." A little boy who had given the crown was still standing beside their carriage, beaming with pride at seeing his creation being worn by an actual prince. His makeshift parade friends had gathered around him, equally amazed by their friend's successful gift-giving mission. "What's your name?" Oliver asked the crown maker, leaning down from the carriage with genuine interest. "Tommy Peterson, Your Highness." The boy replied formally, though his formality was undermined by his enormous grin. "I live on Maple Street with my mom and dad and my sister Sarah, who told me about Prince Fierce a lot." "Well, Tommy Peterson from Maple Street," Oliver said seriously, "you are officially the royal crown designer. This is the best crown anyone has ever made for me." Alexander watched this exchange and felt something click into place in his understanding of what royal duty truly meant. It wasn't about perfect waves or flawless protocol or impressing international dignitaries. It was about moments like this, genuine connections with the people they served, recognition of their creativity and kindness, and the willingness to value human warmth over ceremonial perfection. As their carriage finally began to move forward again, continuing toward the ceremonial platform, Alexander made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. He stood up beside his brother, waved to Tommy Peterson and his parade of friends, and called out, "Thank you for making this the best parade ever." The crowd's response was thunderous. They weren't just cheering for princes anymore. They were celebrating the moment when protocol gave way to humanity, when royal service remembered its heart. And at the center of it all was Oliver, wearing his paper crown with pride and dignity, having inadvertently taught his older brother and an entire kingdom that sometimes the most important rule is knowing when to break all the other rules. The royal carriage approached the ceremonial platform where the parade's climax awaited, but the atmosphere had transformed completely from what anyone had planned. Word of Oliver's paper crown and the spontaneous crowd interactions had spread ahead of them through the gathered spectators, creating an electricity of anticipation that was entirely different from the formal reverence that usually accompanied royal ceremonies. King Edmund and Queen Isabella, who had completed their portion of the parade route and were now positioned on the ceremonial platform, could see their son's carriage approaching in the distance. Even from their elevated position, they could tell something unusual was happening. The crowd's energy was different, more animated, more joyful, more genuinely engaged than during typical royal appearances. "Something's changed," Queen Isabella observed, adjusting her position to get a better view of the approaching carriage. "Listen to how they're cheering. It's not the usual polite applause." King Edmund nodded, his experienced eye reading the crowd's mood with the skill of someone who had spent decades in public service. "They sound genuinely excited, not just respectfully enthusiastic. I wonder what the boys have been up to." Sir James Pemberton, the chief of protocol, was consulting his detailed schedule with growing concern. The parade was running slightly behind schedule, which was unusual but not unprecedented. However, the reports he was receiving from security personnel along the route were unconventional. Phrases like unprecedented crowd engagement and deviation from standard protocol kept appearing in the communications, though none of the reports indicated any security concerns. As the prince's carriage drew closer, the details became visible, and the assembled dignitaries experienced a collective moment of astonishment. Prince Oliver was indeed wearing what appeared to be a paper crown decorated with children's artwork, while his ceremonial crown sat abandoned on the carriage seat beside him. Prince Alexander was standing beside his brother, waving with an enthusiasm that far exceeded his usual controlled composure. "Is that," Lady Margaret Whitfield began, her voice trailing off as she struggled to process what she was seeing. "Is Prince Oliver wearing a paper crown?" Queen Isabella raised her hand to shield her eyes from the sun, getting a clearer view of her sons. When she realized what had happened, her initial reaction was not dismay but rather a smile of understanding and pride. "He certainly is," she confirmed. "And look how happy he looks!" The carriage finally reached the ceremonial platform, and as Oliver stepped down, still wearing his handmade crown with obvious pride, the full impact of his transformation became clear to everyone present. This wasn't a protocol violation born of disrespect or carelessness. This was a 7-year-old boy who had discovered the joy of connecting with his future subjects in the most authentic way possible. Alexander helped his brother down from the carriage, and for the first time in months of preparation, he felt completely comfortable in his role. The pressure to perform perfectly had been replaced by something far more valuable, the understanding that genuine service meant responding to people's humanity with humanity of his own. King Edmund approached his sons, his expression unreadable to the watching dignitaries and media representatives. This was the moment that would determine how the kingdom's leadership would respond to such an unprecedented breach of protocol. The international guests were watching carefully, likely forming opinions about the royal family's discipline and the prince's fitness for future leadership. Well, King Edmund said, stopping in front of his sons and examining Oliver's paper crown with serious attention. That's quite an impressive piece of royal regalia, Prince Oliver. May I ask where you acquired such a magnificent crown? Oliver beamed with pride, his confidence unshaken by his father's formal tone. Tommy Peterson from Maple Street made it for me. He drew Prince Fierce a lot on it because he knew I liked dragons. And it's much more comfortable than the regular crown because it's made specifically for my head. King Edmund nodded gravely, as if considering this explanation with the same weight he would give to matters of state policy. I see. And what happened to your ceremonial crown? It's safe in the carriage, Oliver assured him quickly. But I wanted to wear Tommy's crown because he worked really hard on it, and it would be rude not to appreciate someone's gift, wouldn't it? The king's serious expression finally cracked, revealing a smile that transformed his entire demeanor. You're absolutely right, my son. It would indeed be rude not to appreciate such thoughtful craftsmanship. He turned to address the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the ceremonial platform and beyond. Citizens of Athermore, King Edmund announced, today we gather to celebrate our kingdom's greatest victory. But we have witnessed an even greater triumph. We have seen our future leaders demonstrate the values that truly matter: compassion, connection, and the courage to choose humanity over formality. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. The cheering that erupted wasn't the polite applause of formal occasions, but the genuine celebration of a people who felt truly seen and valued by their royal family. Queen Isabella stepped forward and knelt down to Oliver's eye level, examining his paper crown with the same attention she might give to actual royal jewels. Tell me about the artwork, she requested. I can see there's a dragon here, and what appears to be a castle. Oliver launched into an enthusiastic explanation of every detail of Tommy's creation, pointing out the dragon's fierce expression, the castle's many towers, and the careful way Tommy had written, "For Prince Oliver," in his best elementary school handwriting. His description was so animated and appreciative that several of the international dignitaries found themselves leaning forward to hear better. Alexander watched his family's response with a sense of relief and growing understanding. He had spent so much energy worrying about meeting expectations that he had forgotten the most important expectation of all, that royal service should make people's lives better, brighter, and more connected. Father, Alexander said, finding his voice among the celebration around them, Oliver helped a lost little boy find his mother during the parade, and he made friends with children who had created their own parade in our honor. He showed me that following protocol isn't as important as responding to what people actually need. King Edmund placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder, recognizing the significance of this moment in his older son's development. And what did you learn from that? Alexander considered the question seriously, aware that his answer would be heard by many people but wanting to speak honestly, rather than diplomatically. I learned that being a good prince means being a good person first, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is just notice people and care about them. The simplicity and sincerity of this response had a profound effect on everyone present. The international dignitaries who had arrived expecting to witness a formal display of royal protocol were instead experiencing something far more valuable, a demonstration of the values that actually create effective and beloved leadership. Sir James Pemberton approached the royal family with obvious concern about the departure from his carefully planned schedule. Your Majesties, he said quietly, we have the ceremonial sword presentation scheduled to begin in precisely 3 minutes, followed by the national anthem and the royal salute. Queen Isabella looked at her sons, both of whom were now engaged in animated conversation with some of the children from the crowd who had been allowed onto the platform. Oliver was showing off his paper crown and explaining the dragon artwork, while Alexander was asking questions about their makeshift parade and complimenting their creativity. Sir James, the Queen said thoughtfully, perhaps it's time we revised our understanding of what makes a ceremony truly ceremonial. Look around. When have you ever seen people this genuinely engaged with royal proceedings? Indeed, The atmosphere on the ceremonial platform and in the surrounding crowd was unlike anything in recent royal history. Children were laughing, adults were smiling broadly rather than maintaining respectful solemnity, and the overall mood was one of celebration rather than obligation. The sword presentation proceeded, but with a notable difference. When Oliver was called forward to receive the ceremonial recognition of his role as a prince of the realm, he approached wearing both his paper crown and carrying his ceremonial crown in his hands. "I thought both crowns should be part of the ceremony," he explained to the gathered assembly. "The official crown represents my duty to the kingdom, but Tommy's crown represents the kingdom's kindness to me. They both matter." This unexpected explanation, delivered with the straightforward wisdom that only children seem to possess, created what many observers would later describe as the most moving moment in recent royal ceremonial history. The idea that leadership was a partnership between duty and human connection, expressed so simply by a 7-year-old, resonated powerfully with everyone present. Alexander's sword presentation followed, and he too had learned from his brother's example. Instead of the formal acceptance speech he had memorized, he spoke spontaneously about the honor of serving people who had shown them such creativity, kindness, and genuine welcome throughout the parade. "Today I learned that being worthy of people's trust means being worthy of their hearts too," Alexander said, his words carrying the weight of genuine realization rather than rehearsed sentiment. As the ceremony concluded with the traditional national anthem, something unprecedented happened. The crowd began singing along with an enthusiasm and volume that had never been recorded at a royal ceremony. But more surprisingly, harmony parts began emerging from different sections of the crowd, creating a rich, complex musical celebration that transformed the formal anthem into a true expression of national unity. Oliver, still wearing his paper crown, sang along with obvious joy, occasionally adding his own creative vocal flourishes that made his family smile and encouraged other children in the crowd to join in with their own musical interpretations. What had begun as a formal ceremonial requirement became a genuine celebration of shared identity and purpose. When the ceremony officially concluded, the royal family faced a choice. Protocol dictated that they should return to the palace for private celebration and formal debriefing. However, the crowd's energy suggested that something special was still happening, something that didn't want to end with the scheduled conclusion of official proceedings. King Edmund made an executive decision that would be remembered as one of his finest moments as a leader. "We're going to stay," he announced to his family and staff. "Not for protocol or ceremony, but because these are our people, and they've shown us something beautiful today. We should be part of it." What followed was an hour of unscripted interaction between the royal family and hundreds of citizens who gradually approached the platform. Children showed off their own artwork, adults shared stories about what the kingdom meant to them, and elderly citizens offered wisdom and perspective that no formal briefing could provide. Oliver, in his paper crown, became the center of a group of young artists who compared their various creative works and planned collaborative projects. Alexander discovered a passion for hearing people's stories and ideas. Finding that genuine curiosity about citizens' lives was far more engaging than memorized talking points. Queen Isabella and King Edmund moved through the crowd not as distant figures accepting formal respect, but as neighbors, learning about the lives and dreams of the people they served. The international dignitaries, initially uncertain about this departure from standard protocol, found themselves drawn into conversations and experiences that gave them unprecedented insight into what made Ethermore's society strong and vital. As the sun began to set over the capital city, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the royal family finally began their journey back to the palace. Oliver had collected several more handmade gifts, including drawings, friendship bracelets, and a small wooden dragon that would become a companion to Prince Fierce-a-Lot. Alexander carried with him something far more valuable than any physical gift, a completely transformed understanding of what royal service could be. He had learned that authenticity was more powerful than perfection, that genuine care was more important than flawless protocol, and that the best way to honor tradition was to remain true to its underlying purpose of serving and connecting with people. The parade that had begun as a formal demonstration of royal dignity had ended as a celebration of human connection, spontaneous joy, and the power of choosing authenticity over appearances. Tommy Peterson's paper crown, still proudly worn by Prince Oliver, had somehow become the symbol of a new approach to leadership, one that valued heart as much as protocol, creativity as much as tradition, and genuine care as much as formal respect. As their carriage rolled through the palace gates, Oliver turned to his brother with a satisfied smile. "That was the best day ever," he declared simply. "Do you think we can do more parades like that?" Alexander smiled back, understanding that his little brother had just asked the most important question about their future roles as leaders. "I think," he replied, "that we can make every day a little more like that if we remember what we learned today." The paper crown, carefully preserved and later displayed in the Royal Museum, would become one of the kingdom's most beloved artifacts, not because of its monetary value or historical significance, but because it represented the day when royal service remembered its heart and chose connection over protocol. And Tommy Peterson from Maple Street became the unofficial royal crown designer, creating special occasion crowns that reminded everyone that the best leaders are those who never forget to appreciate the creativity, kindness, and humanity of the people they serve.